Next up, we have Andrew Seiler, who's going to talk about the Transportation Alternatives Program.
All right, thank you, Eric. It's interesting having had the opportunity to present or to participate in a lot of these planning partner meetings. I know it's a wide range of different groups. We have predominantly MoDOT and the planning partners, but also city and county staff, LPA staff, and really to deliver these transportation alternative projects, it's a group effort. I know there's involvement from the spectrum of all of those groups mentioned, and we appreciate everybody's involvement, whether it's during the application phase or even the construction phase and all phases in between. So I was asked today to talk about the Transportation Alternatives Program and an overview. And with that being said, on the groups, it's kind of hard to develop an overview that is applicable to all of you. So hopefully through the course of this overview, you'll find some information useful depending on your level of involvement. So as far as the TAP program, it is the Transportation Alternatives Program. It has gone through several iterations and names, beginning back in the early 90s with ICE-T when the program was introduced as Transportation Enhancements. The TAP, as we know it, was authorized under Section 1122 of MAP 21. Was most recently reauthorized under the FAST Act under several other sections, 1104, 1109, so on and so forth, as the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program. Set-aside meaning it's actually incorporated into the STBG, the Surface Transportation Block Program now. We still call it TAP. Occasionally we still call it enhancements, but regardless, it is essentially the same program that focuses on non-traditional alternative transportation projects. Within it now, those you may be familiar with the Safe Routes to School program. That is no longer a standalone program. It's actually incorporated into this TAP program, as are the recreational trails that Missouri Department of Natural Resources administers. As is typical with the other federal aid highway programs, TAP is a reimbursement program requiring a local match of at least 20%, though oftentimes we do see a larger contribution from the locals in order to make their applications a little more competitive through the selection process. We state this often, it's not a grant, so you are expected to pay your consultant or your contractors first and then request federal reimbursement at a later time. There is a less preferred method in which you can pay your vendors within a couple days of receiving that reimbursement. Legislation does require that these projects are selected through a competitive selection process and administered by the state DOT with additional oversight from Federal Highway Administration. As I mentioned, these are non-traditional transportation projects. They're not roadway resurfacings or bridges. Pedestrian bridges obviously would be an eligible activity. Basically, what we see with these types of projects are bicycle and pedestrian facilities, infrastructure projects that link, get folks from point A to point B. These aren't, other than the recreational trails program, these aren't loops around a park or things of that nature. As far as the statewide call, what we call the rural call, even though it does incorporate some of the MPO areas, but this is exclusive of the TMA areas. We limit the statewide call to just a few categories that otherwise would be eligible. There are additional eligibility categories, but due to the competitive nature and the limited funding, what we'll see on that statewide call are sidewalks and trails predominantly. Now in the TMA areas, their criteria is at their discretion. I do know that historic preservation and some non-infrastructure type activities can and have been permitted. Things such as restoration of train depots that might incorporate a welcome center and have displays of historic transportation aspects of the area. Can we go to the next slide, please? So that was kind of what the program is in a nutshell. The way the funding actually works is basically the funding levels that we distribute are still based on the Transportation Enhancement Program dating back to '09. So we're still in, distributing these and receiving that money at a state level, national level based on '09 dollars. And we break that money into several different categories. Overall, we get roughly $20 million for the program statewide. I know recreational trails just this past fiscal year awarded about $1.4 million worth of projects. So what we're left with after that is a little over $18 million. Now I know this may be a little hard to see. I kind of borrowed this graphic. If you hover your cursor on the left side of your screen, you have an option to zoom in. I apologize if that is difficult, but the bubble graphics there, if you look at kind of that right side, the standalone, so 50% of that of the funds remaining after recreational trails at DNR gets their money. 50% of that goes to MoDOT. That's the any area of the state funds. MoDOT uses that to fulfill the requirements of their ADA transition plan and construct those projects with deficient infrastructure, typically in conjunction with other roadway projects. And then from there, if you look at kind of that left column, we have several different categories. The over 200,000 in population area, those are going to be your TMA areas. 5 to 200,000 in population area, and then the under 5. And you'll see in the text there on the left, the TMAs for those over 200,000 areas get about half of that available money, and the remainder is broken down further. Now, of that 9.1 million, that is just actually the federal fiscal year funding. Actually, that's federal fiscal year 21 funding. We have about 9.1 million to work with. Won't delve too much into that. We could skip to the next slide, please. So kind of what's going on currently. A lot of you, like I mentioned, have been involved in the development of TAP, not just recently, but through the course of every couple of years when we have those calls for projects. Report today, kind of what's going on with our most recent call for projects, again, in the non-TMA areas. Those applications were due late January, so we're still, I don't have a whole lot to report on project selections. That's going to be going on over the next few weeks. But as I mentioned, it is required that these are selected competitively. I know a lot of you on the call today are part of your respective district's selection committee. Again, we appreciate your efforts there. Those are going to be evaluated. The applications will be evaluated and scored and ranked by those committees between now and March 19th. And then awards, I'll put that announcement for funding awards out no later than the end of March. Hopefully we'll be able to get those out and get those projects rolling. We actually, as far as calls for projects, we historically had put those out every even numbered year. So with the expiration of the FAST Act late last year, we were fortunate to kind of get a continuing resolution to allow us to move forward with a call for projects. We kind of were uncertain for a time there, but we went ahead and put out 1 year worth. Hopefully we'll get something going either through another continuing resolution or more ideally another highway bill. But so we only had a little over $3.9 million available. Typically, as you know, we for the statewide call have closer to $8 million. It is distributed to the districts based on their population. And looks like this may not have been so I've got some updated numbers for you on this. Like I said, the call or the deadline was recent. So I've actually got some updated numbers of that for the 3.9 million available. We actually had 66 applications statewide. It kind of surprised me. I didn't really know what to expect. To give you some perspective on how popular this program is, we had 87 applications last call for projects back in 2018 and 90 applications in 2016 statewide. So, we're really approaching the same level of interest that we always have, even with that funding reduced to about half the typical level. $22.6 million in total project cost for those requested projects, which equates to about $16 million for federal share. So as you can see, we have about 4 times the request for funding as we actually have funding available. Average project cost of about $343,000. As I mentioned in the first slide, the minimum match is 20%. We actually see a local match commitment in those applications of about 29%. So folks are really trying to make their applications more competitive and bumping up that match, because as you know, they do get additional points for that increased commitment. So the average for the applications and the anticipated improvements is a little shy of half a mile per project. So with that limited funding, we're hoping of those 66 applications, about 16 will be funded. So, not a lot of money. There is a lot of interest, and so it is going to be very competitive this year. As I've kind of alluded to, the 3 TMAs do have that money sub-allocated directly to them. They hold their own application periods. There aren't any active calls for projects right now. I know Mark and East West Gateway both have had a recent call for projects, and to my knowledge, I believe those are under consideration by the board, or maybe in the case of Mark, may have already gone through that effort. So if you have any questions, I'm not as directly involved in those as that funding is directly sub-allocated to them. I'm more heavily involved in the statewide call to administer those projects. So if you have any specific questions related to any recent submissions of applications, I might suggest you direct those to them. Next slide, please. So I know we do have, we've been one too far. Thank you. So with that's kind of an overview of where we're at, kind of what's going on. We'll be getting those new projects rolling pretty quick. So with that in mind, I know we do have some folks on the line that are going to be, getting ready to move forward with those with the cities and counties and anybody that might be in the capacity to assist with that. So I want to talk about the person in responsible charge requirement. This is actually identified in the Code of Federal Regulations as a requirement that an agency must have a person, what we call a person in responsible charge. For those that recently went through the application process for a TAP project, you know that you would have had to obtain that certification prior to applying. And the point being is we want to familiarize you with all the processes necessary to successfully deliver these projects. That person is going to at all times be responsible for keeping up with what's going on throughout the delivery of the project. They do have to be a full-time public employee or an elected official. Most of the time there are consultants involved in these projects, but they cannot actually serve as the person responsible charge. We obviously do encourage anyone that's going to have a hand in delivering these projects to seek that certification and take the training necessary to familiarize yourself with all of the ins and outs of the project. So I won't go through all of these line by line on what the responsibilities are, but just know that the expectations are that you're going to be aware of all of the project activities at all times. Maintain familiarity with what's going on. Make the decisions on design and change orders through the course of construction. Execute agreements, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention this. I won't link to that just to avoid any potential for technical problems. But if you visit our LPA website, it's on MoDOT's homepage. If you click on the Doing Business with MoDOT option, it will take you to our LPA website. There is a direct link to our training opportunities. To get that person responsible charge certification, we have assembled a course. It takes about 3 to 4 hours to do, and there are some quizzes throughout. Certification is valid for anyone that takes that for 2 years, so you don't have to do it every year. And I wanted to point out too, we're excited to finally be able to provide these in a more personable manner. We've been actually quite successfully went through a virtual training where we had experts in each of the fields of right of way and construction, provide training with the assistance of our LTAP, the Local Technical Assistance Program. Had nearly 90 people attend that, and the feedback we got was that they all were very appreciative to not just have to go through it as a computer course and have the opportunity to ask questions and hear directly from the experts in each of those fields. As far as other training, we try and capture as many opportunities on our website as we can for you to have those training opportunities to learn more about any area that you might have questions in, anything you're uncertain about, whether it be right of way or environmental requirements, what have you. So if you're just interested in the local program in general, or if you're one of those that are hoping you get selected for a project, or even if you have an ongoing federal aid project, there's just a multitude of training opportunities, videos provided by Federal Highway, National Highway Institute, and then the course calendar for opportunities through LTAP. Next slide, please. So just as far as risks, it's inherent with any of the federal aid programs that there are risks associated with that could jeopardize federal funding. So our group, the LPA group within the design division, we meet with our partners at Federal Highway on an annual basis to identify some of those risks, several of which I've noted here. Buy America, this is a big one. Steel components incorporated into the project must have certifications stating that all of the steps of manufacturing whatever steel or iron product is incorporated into that project have those certifications that it was done domestically. This even includes the coating of rebar, so on and so forth. So don't let it even get unloaded off of the truck until you have those certifications in hand, because if it's found that any non-domestic steel products were incorporated into a project, that could jeopardize the funding for the entire project. Bidding and procurement, obviously there are opportunities here for missteps. We do provide a boilerplate for your use in bidding these projects out at the PS&E stage. We encourage you not to modify that because, if you include things like warranties or retainage, things that aren't allowed, it could, we could run into problems with that. So just, ensure it's advertised on MoDOT's website for a minimum of 21 days. And if there are any questions, myself, the district staff, who we lean on heavily to assist us in the administration of these projects, are very helpful for you as well. Right of way, if you don't have the experience in acquiring right of way, considering hiring somebody that does have that experience. All matters dealing with right of way have to adhere to the Uniform Act, even if it's temporary easements. So just kind of know what you're getting into with that right of way, and if you're not comfortable going through that, feel free to seek the assistance out that you feel you might need. Environmental clearances, we have a really slick system to initiate that clearance process for environmental clearances called RER, Request for Environmental Review. This is something that can be started early on in the project. It should be started early on in the project. And we have a wonderful right-of-way staff. They're knowledgeable in every aspect of right-of-way, whether it be historic preservation, threatened and endangered species, wetlands, what have you. So just know that going into it, you are going to be asked for quite a bit of documentation to seek that clearance. And it could be categorized as, a categorical exclusion, environmental assessment, environmental impact statement, which all require varying degrees of or levels of documentation, and take anywhere from 2 to 4 months if it's a CE, or years if it's an environmental impact statement. Although most of these TAP projects will fall into that categorical exclusion category. So just don't do anything as far as land disturbance or tree clearing prior to ensuring that you do have full environmental clearance, and you're notified that it's okay to proceed with that. Work zones and traffic control. This is something that LPAs, not just MoDOT, but you as project owners of these TAP projects, you're expected to conduct the project so it's safe for both the workers and the motorists traveling through it, and any bicyclists and pedestrians that will be traveling near or through that work zone. So you as a person in responsible charge, it's not just the contractor's responsibility, it's your responsibility to oversee that project as well, and ensure that everybody's doing their job to ensure a safe environment while that project's going on. Certified payroll, the last one I'll touch on here. Obviously, Davis-Bacon does apply to these projects. So, as a person in responsible charge, typically your consultant will be conducting those wage rate interviews that are required, and you'll be the one responsible for retaining those documents. If there's a disadvantaged business enterprise requirement for these jobs, in addition to those wage rates, there'll be commercially useful function reviews that should be performed to ensure that everybody is performing the tasks and doing the jobs as was expected at the onset of that project. Reasonable progress. I'll just start off to note too that this is the typical one for the non-TMA projects. The TMAs have their discretion to instate their own reasonable progress and modify the timelines therein. So this is just a general one that you'll often see in your program agreement for your TAP projects. And just know that 23 months is the timeline in which you're expected to have your project under construction, or I should say contract awarded. So just, as you plan your project, just know that within a couple of years, you are expected to have that under contract. That's important because at the onset of any project, we establish end dates, and any work that goes on beyond that end date won't be eligible for reimbursement. So we have to really monitor the progress on these. We don't want to let them become inactive. So through the course of the project, we are expecting to see invoices at least monthly to know that the project is proceeding as expected. As far as a lot of this can be done concurrently as well. You see a lot of those, environmental can be going on as design is, and things of that nature. The red items you'll see there, those are a particular note. Those are kind of stop points, if you will. And whereas you need to have your funding obligated and ensure that commitment of funding is in place prior to proceeding to the next step. Doing so, not doing so can jeopardize the funding for whatever phase you're in. So, before you begin preliminary engineering, ensure that your engineering services contract is executed and the funding obligation has been sought after, and same goes for right-of-way, utilities, and the construction authorization. Like I said, it was a really quick overview. I knew I was speaking to a multitude of different groups here, so your level of involvement is varying. So I can certainly try and answer any questions. I do see a couple here. If you want to back up.
And they start with the 1 year versus 2 year cycle, Andrew.
Yeah, the 2 year cycle, typically, this is as long as I've been with MoDOT. Eric said he's been here a quarter century. I'm only about 20% of a century, or approaching that. But even through that time frame, it historically has been the every 2 years. We do that just because there is a lot of involvement from district staff, you as RPCs and MPOs, trying to assemble the selection committees, area engineers to look at those projects or potential projects and draft those letters of consent, and just to consolidate the efforts that everybody puts into this. Through the life of a highway bill, we can usually forecast what we're going to expect each of those fiscal years, and do that, every other year. We didn't have that opportunity this past fall. Right before Thanksgiving, actually, is when we put this call for projects out. And just due to the popularity, people were practically beating down the door. When are we going to have a call for projects? Are we going to have a TAP program this year? So we didn't want to wait to ensure that we had that additional federal fiscal year funding. So this is kind of an anomaly this year, and just due to the popularity of the program, we wanted to make that money available as soon as possible.
And, let me just read the question too. Just a couple more here, so everybody can hear that's not on the application. Considering federal funding allocation guidelines with roughly 60% of the statewide quote unquote rural call allocation earmarked for populations under 5,000 and 40,000 for 5 to 200,000, are we allowed or should we be considering that when we're meeting to score the applicants at district level?
Yeah. So as you saw in some of those earlier graphics, legislation does say that we have to be aware of how those projects are allocated due to based on the population. So historically, how that has kind of shaken out is I don't know if it's just luck or what, but there actually has been, based on the applications we receive and the percentage thereof, on the rural call, the under 5 and the 5 to 200, it has been around that 60-40 split. So in looking at this year's call for applications, it surprisingly doesn't. It's about half and half. So we'll really have to work hand in hand with our financial services division. And I have kind of my data. They have some data as well that shows what where we're at with those funding obligations. So I don't think we're going to be in too much of an issue this year with how that shakes out. And like I said, it's just kind of been by natural occurrence that and surprising to me and maybe to some that some of those smaller communities are stepping up to the plate and kind of as competitive as the 5 to 200,000 communities. So I need to read this question to make sure I'm actually answering it, but okay. So should we consider that when you're meeting to score? Honestly, I think so. We didn't specify on this last call for projects that a certain percentage needed to go to one versus the other. But I think just knowing what we know with that kind of 60-40 split, we didn't ask you to, we didn't make a separate call for projects. I don't want to get to that point where we're doing so because it really limits the flexibility within those district selection committees to award funding to the highest needs. We look at it at a statewide level. So, in looking at the applications we received, some districts had overwhelmingly applications from those small communities. Some had more applications from the 5 to 200,000 communities. So we really want to look at it at more of a statewide level, and I think we can do that just based on kind of how the applications have shaken out. So.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Other comments or questions for Andrew?
I do see one here. Eric talks about DBE. Are there things to be aware of in terms of procurement with DBE goals? Yeah, I mean, early on, based on the PS&E, the plan specification and estimate, the project sponsors will submit those to the district staff. Those DBE goals are assigned early on, and they can vary just based on the location of the project and the availability of DBE firms to perform that work in that particular area. They look at a lot of different factors: the type of work, the type of project. So you'll know your goal going in. It'll be up to the contractor to ensure that they have at least that minimum DBE percentage met as part of the project. And we do retain a list of certified contractors and vendors that are eligible to fulfill that requirement.
Eric,
All
this
right.
is Julie. Can I just chime in on that real quick?
Please, Julie.
Hi, this is Julie Stottlemyre. I'm the LPA administrator for MoDOT. Just to add a little bit to that DBE conversation, it's more on the contractor side, but they really need to know if they've listed their DBE subcontractors, that if they have any changes to those subcontractors or any changes to the work those subcontractors are going to be performing, that needs to be approved before any changes can be made to that. So that's really where that hiccup occurs with the DBE goals.
Yeah, Eric, this is Missy with the External Civil Rights Division. The one thing that I want to add on top of what Andrew said and Julie said is really making sure that DBE firm is certified in the Missouri Regional Certification Committee database. We get a lot of confusion between our database that's listed on our website and firms being certified by the Office of Administration. They operate a WBE program, MBE program, where MoDOT strictly only operates a DBE program. So those are some of the red flags or areas that we see that we sometimes have questions and have to send back.
Great point, Missy.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?